Hi, folks. This is Stevenson. Podcast is Natural Passages, Reveal the Unmarked Doors of Life. This is the final of the Doubt series. And in this one, what I want to talk about is the actual traits or behavioral aspects of doubt and what we need to do in order to manage it and prevent it from um, reducing our success or actually creating failures. So, typically, if we remember that all organizations are basically a variable, living, flexible uh, organization of people, or let's just call it lots of moving parts. One of the moving parts, or the things that often gets in our way, is that where a project or a strategy is a nice, well laid out plan, but it often doesn't focus on some of the other issues with priorities such as culture. So when we're looking at the overall situation, especially if you have stuff that goes bump in the night frequently, when every time you do the project and you're trying to figure out what's going on, the first thing I would look at is what's the underlying culture, which is another way of saying there are unwritten rules of how to be successful in this organization. Now, most people, some organizations have culture statements and things of that nature, and they're nice. But if you really want to find out what your culture is, you have to get into the conversation of what are the unwritten rules of survival or success in this organization? And that goes all the way down to the lowest level. And when you understand that, you understand your culture because two things can occur. I've been in a major project where a massive new project was an installation of multi-million-dollar machines, and the profit plan was put into place, and the implementation plan, a three-year plan to implement, knowing it's going to affect profits. And usually this frequently happens about 18 months into the purchase and the implementation. Culture, the unwritten rules of, especially if you're an entrepreneur organization, is fear seeps in, and we start worrying about, oh God, we're on a decline, and even though it was known it was going to happen, we know it was planned. We start shifting things, and that begins to shift priorities very quickly. So what ends up happening, you have a forgotten or fading purpose in a sense as your own internal instincts are kicking in, especially if you're leadership, instead of sitting down and saying, how's this progressing? How's it matched to plan? And what are we doing? And is it consistent? And if it's being undermined, then we're failing to ask ourselves, well, why are we doing it? And is there a alignment? And if there's not alignment, we're not going to move forward. So this is very much the case where when leadership doesn't says one thing but enforces others, you're going to have inconsistency, and people are going to follow the enforcement and not necessarily the rah rah rewards. So in doing that, you got to determine, is the conflict functional or is it personal? So if it's a functional issue, something's clashing within the organization that's creating doubt or eroding support, and that becomes a real difficult issue. And if it's personal, the priorities are shifting. This is where we're finding that people's values, religious and otherwise, are getting in the way and about committing to a project, and it can create a lot of difficulty. So just examining the prioritization and are we consistent, congruent with who we are, what we want, and are we moving forward is a very valuable, important part. But the challenges against continuing to move forward happens frequently in all organizations. That's why I said we're at a lot of moving parts. Any types of changes in leadership, uh, even just slight behaviors, can begin around a project, can begin to erode support and create doubt. So oftentimes, if there's a change in sponsors or project leaders, that these people will bring in a different way, a different view of what's going on. And if they don't take the time to get alignment, what ends up happening is you there's a resistance, there's a hesitancy to say, oh, what's the real truth here? What do I really need to do? Another thing that project participants or organization participants will be is there fading leadership support? And that means are you still in line, and are we having a consistent message to as we move through this project? or are we now hearing fading, which is, well, that's not quite as important. Well, I know that. And we start hedging. And once we start the hedging, we're planting the doubt, and it's almost like we are creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. We're setting ourselves up to fail because we're not really understanding if this project's that important, it should be foremost all the time moving forward. Um, if leadership has the inability to face strong dissonance within the organization, and which means to work through it with people to get them on board, and that can lead to a variety of things. But the idea is to stay focused, hear people out, and then make a decision. Uh, you will get people basically patronizing, but not necessarily fulfilling. If there are self-serving agendas, and unfortunately we're humans, everybody has one. It's just depending on how it fits into the organization of the project is a real big issue. So looking into that, and then if the leadership has a lack of formal authority and structure, in other words, in name be given a project and leadership of it, but someone above constantly overrides, um, then there's going to be an erosion of focus. And that erosion of focus then begins to get into the second area, which is delivery now becomes a problem. So delivery problems is showing symptoms that we're having doubt show up in our project. Is the first one is the inability to schedule meetings, creating delays in deliverables. If the project's important, there should be a ability to schedule meetings and manage the deliverables in a way that is consistent with the importance of the project. And so, if that diminishes, the perception is well, it's not that important, and so I'm not going to give it that much attention. Fair weather support is one of those where when the adversity of any project gets a little heated, you start seeing people wane in their support. Doubt sets in, and they begin to wonder: is this, do I need to take cover or do something else? And these are all natural. And that's why this constant communications is really important. Um, Adding on to unrealistic workloads by creating is a problem. So if you want to overcome it, you need to create structures. Uh, One of the issues I've observed over the years with a lot of enterprise management systems um, is it always seems like the perception is it's a lot easier than it is. And anytime you start an enterprise conversion, management system conversion, it's 10 times worse and more difficult than you might have imagined. So frequently with my clients is one of the most successful ones over a 3-year period is we actually planned an increase of employees, temporary hires, while the conversion was being done. So it brought in, it wasn't just consultancy, it actually were temporary employees who had the skill base to continue to manage the system. And we did a blend. And in doing that, the conversion went very smoothly. It was integrated into the system. There's always frustrations when there's change, but it moved forward. And because it was a very high growth organization, at the end of the 3 years, they fully absorbed all those temps into the system and continued their growth and then materialized or manifested the profits that they were looking for. I've done others where they asked all the employees to do the conversion, and we're not looking at that. That's piling on. And if you're already working full time and now you want me to do another full time job, we're not paying attention to how much burnout we're going to do, and you're going to create people's resentments. So that leads to doubt about the project's success because I'm worried about myself and my own potential to be successful. So adding any kind of additional workload to do special projects, you then, if you're going to add it, say it's a limited time, and then after that, you drop down back to a lower level. Sure, in a crisis, we're going to have to pick it up. But if we're not really managing time in the sense of workload effect on the employees, you're setting yourself up to fail. Apathy, fatigue, and veiled attacks from detractors are often something happens You always have the naysayers, but the main thing is if fatigue is set in, that's an issue. If apathy set in, that's an issue. And the question is why do they not believe in it? And oftentimes in today's environment, because we push so hard, we end up having burnout, and so people get very begin to fall into the trap of competing commitments, which is basically is who do I serve this craziness, or how do I take care of myself? And oftentimes when we get into these major change projects and we've not managed the workloads of the people, that's how you lose some of your best people, because they'll say, well, I get more money for less hours, or I get the same money for less hours and less headaches. And we end up suddenly realizing, oh, I wonder how they left or why they left. And the truth of the matter is we pretty much opened the door for them. The last one is our messaging during any project. And in order to prevent doubt from seeping in, because it always will be, you cannot have a communication vacuum. So every meeting, there should be some support towards the project. This is throughout the organization, keeping them apprised what's going on, what we're doing, what our success is, what our challenges are. All of those things are very important. What happens is most people don't understand this, or for choose to ignore it. I don't know which it is. The tyranny of distance, which basically means if top leadership is not constantly involved in a major project, that will show up is you're out there and you're a target and you really don't understand what's going on. And instead, if you have much more face value than you've had in the past, the impact of it will be much greater performance, because research has shown that face value, your actual presence in front of the people, not in front of a screen, but in front of the people, is a critical aspect. Now, obviously, if you're a large company and you're in long distance, then a screen will have to work, depending on circumstances. But it's really a big deal, and people do not really understand that if there's leadership isn't present sufficiently, people will drift. A couple other things. Um, when leadership's not listening very well, they're pushing, demanding, telling people how, my day on all this other silliness. What ends up happening is that people uh, believe you don't really relate to them. And so literally listening and summarizing and feeding back, what are you hearing? Always asking them, well, what would make it better, or what would support you better, or what could you do different, and what could we do different? And you get them engaged in a problem solving, but also from a point of view of a collaborative problem solving. And the impact of it is it leads to the success. I've alluded to this in the prior workshops. One of the reasons I was so successful in turning around failing banks, and I'm talking about in the coffin ready to put the nails on top, the regulators were, was messaging on a continuous basis, working with them, supporting them, building their confidence back up. Now, you may not be in a crisis or turnaround situation and therefore not have that, but project success is the same thing. It's the constant messaging, constant revealing of solid leadership, ensuring that delivery is actually going to be as close to on time as possible. Or if you have things like weather or things of that nature that get in the way, being absolutely clear how we're going to address it. And it has to be from a we point of view. As you do that, if you manage these things and you're a leader, what ends up happening is you find out that your leadership is about influencing and supporting people to be successful. And when you do that, doubt generally it no longer seeps into the organization. So I hope some of these are helpful. I was thinking I might actually, as I was saying here, there's one other aspect of doubt. I think I'm going to do one more, so there'll be five all in total. I was thinking there was only going to be four, but I want to talk about how doubt actually can serve a leader. And when you look at it and change your frame of reference that all doubt's bad into doubt has its place, its question is how do we utilize it? We begin to find a more effective process. So I'm Herb Stevenson. This is Natural Passages, Revealing the Unmarked Doors of Life. I wish you well, and hope you're enjoying your summer. It's hot and humid here east of Cleveland on my horse farm. And take care. Bye-bye.